Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahana Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karvavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu Ma Vidvisavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. May He protect us, may He sustain us. May we grow in strength together, may our study together be fruitful, and may we not hate one another. Om peace, peace, peace. Okay, good evening. Welcome to the class. We have Sanskrit camp going on at Kanchi's, so a lot of the regulars aren't here. Okay, so we've entered into part 2, and we're in chapter 1 of part 2. We just started it. And as I mentioned last week, that in part 1, in the very first verse, or in chapter 2, where Yama started the actual instructions, that the very first thing he said was that there are two paths that present themselves before man. The path of prayas and the path of shreyas. The path of prayas is the path of the pleasant, and the path of shreyas is the path of the good. And as he said these are like a fork in the road. One prayas goes towards trying to enjoy the world as much as they can, and as a result getting more and more entangled into the world and physical existence, and getting caught up in the cycle of birth and death. Whereas Shreyas is the path towards the truth. Instead of being just spending all your time concerned with pleasures and making money and things like that, you begin to question, what's life all about? What is God? Where is God? How can I experience God? So that begins an inner search that gradually brings the person closer and closer to union with God. And so these like two paths are there before man. And that's like the basic theme of this Upanishad. Now in part 2, chapter 1, again the very first verse, he basically sets the other main theme, is that the self-created Lord has created the sense organs with the inherent defect that they are by nature outgoing. In other words, it's the nature of the sense organs to always be looking outside, towards something outside our own self, and then the mind is then absorbed in that and processing all that information, and our whole attention then gets diverted towards what's outside. And in the process, we're not aware of what's inside. And so this is what causes our ignorance. This is why, even though God is present within us, within each and every person, most people don't have any idea that He's actually there. It's like there's somebody standing right behind you, but you're looking the other way, and so you don't know. They're closer than anything you can imagine, but you don't know they're there because you're not looking in the right direction. And so this is the other big kind of cause of our ignorance, is that all the time we're absorbed and involved in what's going on outside and not at all aware of what's actually inside ourselves. So the self-created Lord has created the sense organs with the inherent defect that they are by nature outgoing. This is why beings see things outside and cannot see the self within. Rarely is there found a wise person seeking immortality who can withdraw his sense organs from external objects and see the self within. Immature people run after the external objects, and they invariably get caught in the widespread net of death. Wise people, however, know where true immortality is. That is why they reject everything in this world, knowing that these things are short-lived. It is by this self that a person knows from taste, form, taste, smell, sound, touch, and sex pleasure. What else remains that the self does not know? In other words, because the self is all-knowing. This truly is that self the Nachiketa was asking about. Now you remember in book 1 how Nachiketa was granted 3 boons by Yama, and the first one was that he could go back to his father would remember him and not be angry anymore, and so forth. The second one was how to perform the fire sacrifice which led to heaven, which Yama named the Nachiketa sacrifice because he's such a good student. But then the third question, the third boon that Nachiketa sought was that some people say we continue to exist after death, some say we don't. He says, I want to know the truth about that. In other words, I want to know who I really am, or what's the reality about my nature. So now in this chapter, Yama is going to be describing what that reality is, and then saying that this is what you were asking. This is the self you were asking about. This is what it actually is. And so here in verse 3, he says that it's by this self that a person knows form, taste, smells, sound, touch, and sex pleasure. What else remains that the self does not know? In other words, because the self is all-knowing. This truly is that self that Nachiketa was asking about. So people think the sense organs are independent. They are not. The whole body-mind complex is dominated by the self. And the sense organs function because of the self. The mere presence of the self is enough to make them work. When a person dies, all his sense organs may be intact, yet they do not function as they derive their power from the self, which is pure consciousness. Because the self is pure consciousness, it is all-knowing. The self is the subject, and everything else is the object. The function of the sense organs is to make us conscious of the things around us, but an object cannot know another object. Objects are all inert matter, and so also are the sense organs. Matter cannot feel or see, but associated with the self, it gives the impression that it is feeling or seeing. For instance, a heated iron ball can burn your skin, but the ball itself does not burn. It is the heat in it that burns. So the self is behind everything that happens in this phenomenal world. In fact, this world itself is a manifestation of the self. Nachiketa's subject of inquiry is this self. Now, in order to understand this, and in order to basically understand one of the teachings of the Upanishads, we need to get clear on the idea of what they're talking about when they talk about this self. As he said, this self, in its own nature, is pure consciousness. As pure consciousness, it is infinite, it is unlimited, and it's Brahman. As you remember, we talked before how when they talk about Brahman, they say it's indescribable what is Satchidananda, existence, consciousness, bliss. And in fact, Brahman is the only thing that exists. Nothing else exists. Brahman is the only thing that is aware, is conscious. Nothing else is conscious. And also Brahman is the source of all bliss, of infinite bliss. Now, in our normal experience, however, our idea of existence is relative. You always have the idea, okay, I exist. I'm alive. I'm here. I'm existing. The planets are existing. The stars are existing. Cars are existing. All these things exist. But all these things exist for a time being. You buy a new car, and then 20 years later, it's rusted out and goes to a junkyard. You get a young body, a healthy body, and 100 years later, it's worn out and exhausted and goes to the junkyard. And like that, everything, even stars, even galaxies, they may exist for billions upon billions of years, but eventually they dissolve, they cease to exist. Now this, it's relative existence. But yet everybody, even though everybody realizes, well, we're all mortal. Someday we're all going to die. But yet within us is a sense that I'm never going to die. I'm always going to exist. I'm always going to be alive. But yet we know, well, this body certainly is not going to be alive forever. It's going to live its span of years, and then it'll go. The same way with our consciousness is most people say, yes, I'm conscious. I'm aware. I'm aware of what's going on now. I'm aware of what's going on in my mind. I'm aware of, I read the paper, so I'm aware of what's going on in China. In all this, we say, yes, I'm conscious, I'm aware. But what our awareness is a very limited kind of picture, window into the world that we can, for most people, the awareness is primarily what's happening in my life, what's happening to me, what am I doing now? And so that our consciousness is very small, very limited. Through education, a person begins to expand his consciousness. So you mentioned before how I'd gone to college. After college, it was back in the days of Vietnam, and the army was waiting. And so I went from college and not realizing kind of what the value, particularly of the college was. But then I got into basic training with people who had practically no education at all. And I just realized how different my mind was, how kind of broader my mind than their mind. They basically knew what was happening to them, and other than that, they weren't aware of much else in the world. So I think through education, we can expand our consciousness. We expand it quite drastically. I'm sure people out at Fermilab, their consciousness is way out in the cosmos, and thinking about things. So, but still, it's a very limited consciousness. And same way, we may have a little bit of happiness. We get a little joy now and then. We may feel a little satisfaction, a little contentment, but it's hardly ecstatic. It's hardly overwhelming. It's just a little bit of joy, a little drop of happiness. So our experience of Satchidananda, existence, consciousness, and bliss is usually just a very small little bit. But the basic idea behind these teachings is that right now, experience of Brahman, your experience of consciousness of the world, is small because your consciousness has identified itself with a physical body and a mind, intellect, and an ego, an individuality. And because of that, all you're experiencing is kind of what comes to you individually. But if you get back to what that consciousness is, then you discover that that consciousness was not really the body, it's not really the mind even, or the personality, it's consciousness. And when you get to that stage, you realize it's just the consciousness. And that consciousness pervades the whole universe. It's equally within all different beings. And it's beyond even this universe. It's something much vaster than this universe. Now, when a person follows the path of prayas, when he follows the path of the pleasant, tries to enjoy the world, like say he gets more and more involved in the world, absorbed in it, his consciousness then gets narrowed down to his kind of personal experiences. But when he begins to kind of reverse things and begin to look, well, who is consciousness? Who's here? Who am I really? Then he's starting to move back towards that infinite, divine, omniscient, omnipotent presence that's there within. And that infinite, omniscient, omnipresent reality, that's who he is. That's who each and every person is. In other words, to understand, you've got to say 100 different people. And right, normally our experience is that, okay, I'm at a party, there's 100 different people here, and I'm standing here in the corner, and I'm schmoozing, chit-chatting with people, things like that. But I'm just this tiny unit of consciousness here, and I'm talking. And I meet a few other people. But yet the truth is that there's one consciousness, and that consciousness is equally within each and every person in that room. And it's actually one self, one consciousness, functioning. And now it's kind of playing with playing. It's interacting with itself, and sometimes fighting, sometimes loving, sometimes happy, or sometimes. But it's like a drama, a play going on. But underlying the play, behind the play, is the same one consciousness. Now, when we see things from our personal standpoint, it says life tends to be a struggle. We're always struggling with problems. We're struggling with relationships with other people. Like that, always there's kind of a battle going on between us and the rest of the universe. But when you become aware, there's one self here, then you realize that there's no struggle for you. There's not conflict. There's not confusion. There's just the one self, the one divine self playing. In Zen Buddhism, one of the most famous koans, in Zen Buddhism they use a koan, like a riddle. It doesn't make any sense intellectually. But when a person kind of experiences the koan, then suddenly it makes sense. And one of the most famous of these koans, so these riddles, is called, what is the sound of one hand clapping? And the person will start thinking, well, what does it mean, one hand clapping? How does one hand clap? But when they get the realization, when they realize, there's one consciousness there, and out of joy, it's playing all these different forms, but it's the one reality playing, then they understand. And but it's something that has to be experienced. It doesn't make sense intellectually, mentally. If we analyze it and reason about it, it doesn't make any sense at all. But when you attain that consciousness, that awareness, then suddenly now you know what it is. So, and this is what kind of spiritual life is, what Vedanta is, and everything is experiencing, being conscious of that reality which underlies what we see in our everyday life. And as a person is moving in that direction, he's gradually unfolding more and more of that infinite kind of wonderful divinity that's there. And he's discovering that within his own consciousness is all protection, all goodness, all love, everything is fine. Once you allow that higher consciousness to begin to become a part of your experience. When we block out that consciousness and then try to deal with the world, it's all struggle and battle, and often we feel we can't cope with it, we can't handle it, and it's all very difficult. As soon as you touch even the fringes of that higher consciousness, of that reality of things, of yourself, then you begin to find yourself just, everything's fine. Some time ago, I think in our meditation class, I read some accounts of it's called from a book called Everyday Enlightenment, about ordinary people who would more like who attain some degree of realization. And these weren't great saints or mystics or anything, but they had realized to some extent this truth. And the common thing that almost all of them said was there's a great sense that everything's okay. I don't have any problems. There's nothing lacking, there's nothing missing. Everything is fine. And this is what happens when we begin to realize the truth. Right now, we're watching a movie, and for some of us, we're watching a horror movie. For some, we're watching a comedy, but we're kind of watching a movie. And in that movie, good things happen, bad things happen, up and downs, and things. If we take that movie totally seriously, then it becomes a problem. It becomes a source of a lot of aggravation and suffering and misery. But when we realize, it's just a movie going on, and when we realize this wonderful divine reality is here, and slowly I'm getting in touch with it. I'm starting to become aware of it. Then everything becomes fine, and then you find that now you're functioning not just as an individual, struggling with everybody else, but you're actually functioning in harmony with that self, which is equally the self in all beings. And your whole experience of what life is. Your whole life gradually becomes transformed and goes higher and higher and higher. And so this is what they're talking about here, is that behind all of our experiences, we see things, hear things, feel things, but behind all that is the self. And that self is completely self-sufficient, completely self-fulfilling, and it's as infinite as God is. When you think that, okay, God, well, He created this whole universe, that reality is there within you, and it can become a part of your life if you allow it to. But the difficult part is that in order to allow that reality to become a part of your life, you have to start to let go of your little self. In other words, we're in the body, we're trying to enjoy things through the body and experience pleasure through the body and achieve success, money, things like this through the body. And it's those drives, those desires, those drives have been behind most of our life, most of our actions. But in order to begin to realize the truth, you have to step back from that. You have to step back from the body, back from the mind, back from the desires. All these things are all, and so that you can become aware of what's there. Because right now, in an ordinary state, our consciousness is glued to that body. It's glued to that body, it's glued to the mind, it's glued to our desires, our ambitions, our emotions, all these things. We're glued to it, we're stuck to it. It's so hard that it's very difficult to think about how to get free of it. And the only way to get free of it, to actually begin to realize this higher truth, is in some way or another to want to start to let go of your intense kind of egoistic drive in life and start to become aware of, to surrender to that which is within, so it can begin to function. It can become a part of your life. And so, but this is the basic idea. Because right now, as an individual, we're a body, maybe a certain age, certain state of health, things like we're a body, we're also a mind. And we maybe have a happy mind, or we may have a very unhappy mind that full of all kinds of negative things. But behind, within, kind of the basis of that body and that mind, there's the presence of God Himself, the presence of divinity. And that divinity is not a God sitting off in heaven somewhere that we try to pray to, oh God, please come help me, I'm in trouble here. That is not like that. That very God is right within, because it's what we are. And someday, eventually, this body will fall off, but we'll still be there. And now we'll begin to go, oh, this is what I am. I think I mentioned a couple of times before how one of the most common of the near-death experiences is that a person, let's say on the operating table, his heart stops or something, and then suddenly he finds himself up near the ceiling, and he's looking down, and he's seeing his body there on the table, and the doctors and nurses around. This has been reported, many times by many people. Now, up to that point, he had always thought that I'm me, I exist, I'm alive because of this body. This is me. But now he looks and he sees, well, that body that is laying there, that's there, but I'm here, and it's not me at all. And that type of separation of consciousness from being absorbed, totally grabbing hold of the body, that's part of the process of gradually getting back to this, well, who am I? If I'm not that body, and if I'm not the kind of mental activities and things, then who am I? Slowly this begins to unfold, the fact that you're actually the infinite consciousness, the one consciousness that pervades. That consciousness is within you. When it becomes an individual, when it gets identified with a particular body and mind, it then becomes that particular individual. It becomes something very small and goes through the life experiences, sometimes happy, sometimes unhappy, and so on. But when it gets back into its real self, then it realizes that it's kind of what you realize is, first of all, that it's the child of God. It's not a child of human parents who gave birth to this body. It's the child of God, the infinite reality. And eventually, at the highest stage, it attains complete union with God, where there's no longer any separate existence. There's only God remains there. And so this is kind of the spiritual journey. It's moving back away from being absorbed into matter, moving back into spirit, into consciousness, into the awareness of who we really are. And as you do this, all your needs, all your desires, everything you felt that was missing or lacking, it gets satisfied. Because by our own nature, we are fully happy, fully content, fully at peace, fully capable. When a person feels that he's in God's hands and that God is operating through him, he realizes that, whatever happens, I can handle it. It's not a problem. Because you have the whole infinite wisdom and love and power of God behind you, and supporting you and protecting you and taking care of you. So that, but it's like I say, it's very difficult for most people to get to this point, because it involves stepping back from who you think you are, who you thought you are all these years, that all the different things that are important to you, kind of letting go, stepping back from all that, so that you gradually become open up to something higher than that. There's a story from Krishna that once there was a king in India, and most of the kings, he had his court guru, and he was always telling the court guru, please give me liberation, please give me freedom, please release me. And so then, finally one day, the guru, he grabbed hold of the pillar in the court and began shouting, "Oh king, let me go, get me free from this pillar." And then the king said, "Well, just let go of it." And then the guru said, "Yes, just let go of it and you'll be free. But as long as you're holding on, as long as all your desires and everything are fixed here in physical, then you're kind of stuck in physical consciousness. As soon as you let go of it, it actually then comes the freedom or liberation." So it's by this self that a person knows all his experiences, form, taste, smell, sound, touch, and sex pleasure. And not only that, not only does the self know whatever we experience, but it knows whatever anybody else experiences too, because it's not our personal self. Our personal sense is coming from the body and mind, but the self, the consciousness, is equally within all beings. So it knows everything, and this is the self that Nachiketa was asking about, that he's wanting to know about. So then verse 4, it says that whatever experiences a person has, whether in the sleeping state or in the waking state, are possible because of that great all-pervasive self. An enlightened soul realizes his oneness with that great self and is no longer subject to grief. So we all experience three states: the waking state, the sleeping state, and the dreamless sleep state. In the waking state, both the mind and the body are active. The sense organs carry their impressions to the mind, and the mind collates them as if the mind is their master. And the mind may be their immediate master, but it is not the ultimate master. The ultimate master is the self, for the mind derives its authority from the self. So when we sleep, the body is at rest, but the mind is active. We dream we are traveling, meeting people, and doing things we normally do in the waking state. This shows that the mind is independent of the body. But the mind is dependent on the self. When we have dreamless sleep, the mind is no longer active. This happens because the self has temporarily withdrawn the power it had delegated to the mind. The body and the mind are both now seemingly dead, as if the self has cast them away as useless adjuncts. After a while, when we wake up, we take time to recognize our surroundings and what time of day it is. We feel, however, highly refreshed. This is because during deep sleep, the self went back to its real nature, even if only for a while. But ignorance drags us back to our waking state, and we are again caught up in the whirlpool of life's struggles. But there are discerning people who see the self as a substrate of all the experiences they have in different states. These experiences are possible because of the self, but they make no impression on the self. The self is a witness to the experiences. It is like a movie screen on which a series of events is projected without affecting the screen in the least. These discerning people also realize their oneness with their self. They remain as witnesses to what happens to them, and this is why they are able to overcome sorrow. So this discussion of the three states, the waking state, the dreamless sleep state, this is considered kind of the foundation of Advaita, non-dual Vedanta, and particularly in the Kathopanishad. It is a fairly short Upanishad. It describes Om, describes the mantra Om, and it divides Om into three letters, A, U, Ma. And it says the first letter, A, corresponds to the waking state, U corresponds to the dream state, and Ma corresponds to the dreamless sleep state. And the idea is that we circle through these three states, waking, dream, and dreamless sleep every day. But yet we find we don't change. We don't change. And from the standpoint of the waking state, from the standpoint of our activities and our desires and our ambitions and all the things we're trying to accomplish in the waking state, sleep is just a waste of time. You have to spend like 8 hours a day in just laying in bed, unconscious of the world. And if you say, well, the world is the reality, the waking state is reality, is what matters, then it all seems like a waste of time. But in fact, we need sleep. It's only sleep and dreaming that allows us to actually function in this world. They found one of the principles behind brainwashing. You remember back in Korea, they had prisoners of war, and they practiced, instead of torture, like people used to do, they practiced what they call brainwashing. And one of the primary kind of methods they use is to deprive the person of sleep. Because after a while, you can't stand it anymore. It's not just that you become tired, but your whole mind and everything, the whole system stops functioning, right? So now, we think of the waking state as reality, as a real world. And we think what we're doing in the waking state, this is the most important thing. This is what really matters. And like I said, the sleeping is kind of just a waste of time. But actually from a spiritual standpoint, from a Vedantic standpoint, the waking state is like the most external state where we're the farthest away from our real self, our real nature. As you go deeper within, you move from the senses, from the physical, you move to the mental. And this then creates the dreams that we can experience, the dream state. And in that dream state we live, for the time being we live in a world totally created by the mind. And for us that world at that time is very real. We don't have any memory or any awareness of the external world, of the physical waking state world. We're totally absorbed in our dream world. And then after that you go into what's called dreamless sleep state, which seems to be the biggest waste because we don't remember anything. We wake up, and the main thing is they say when you wake up, and that's you feel refreshed. You feel like you've been kind of energized, re-energized by the experience, but you don't remember anything that happened. And so, what good is it? But according to Vedanta, spiritual teaches that dreamless sleep state is actually a very high state. Because in the waking state, body and mind are active, and that's what we're involved in, is what we're experiencing through body and mind. And we are then in the external world. And there's other people, there's other things going on in life, and all kinds of problems to deal with, and things like that. But that's actually kind of the most external. Then we come to the dream state, and then we're in the kind of the mental state, into the mind. Now that dream state is actually much closer to our real self than the waking state was. And actually, if you think in terms of power, if you think in terms of accomplishing things in the world, almost everything that happens, all the events, all the houses that get built, everything else, all these things are actually coming out of mind. The measure for how you look, when they're building a house, you look and you see the carpenters and the bricklayers and everything, and they're working very hard, and they're putting up the studs and walls and everything, and you think, well, the house is there because these workmen did such heavy manual labor. They did such physical labor and built the house. But actually the house is there. This house is the mind of the architect. It conceived of the house. It first came up with a mental idea. Okay, we can build a house like this. And then the physical, it was just an expression of that. It was carrying that idea, that mental idea, putting it into action and making it manifest at the physical level. But the real source of that house was the mind, the mental level, not the physical. And this is true of all human civilization. It's not just our physical activities that cause things to happen. It's the ideas and that conceptions and things that form in the mind and gradually work themselves out on the physical level. But now when you come to the dreamless sleep state, like I said, it seems like a complete waste because you don't remember anything about it. You don't even feel like you've experienced anything. But they say that it's actually kind of a very high state, because in that state you actually have gotten back into your real self. But the problem is that there's a veil of ignorance still over. Now, in order to understand this, when they speak of Maya, when they speak of this, how creation works, they say that Maya has two powers. One is the veiling power, and one is the projecting power. And in the deep sleep state, that veiling power, which covers the reality. In other words, first you have a veiling power, it covers Brahman, it covers God, the present, and then you can project. You can project this world, all these experiences, all these events. It's like once you've got your movie screen, you can project any kind of movie you want on it. But the screen is there, and because of that, you can project things on it. But that screen covers kind of the reality that's there. So when we go into deep sleep, even though we've kind of gone away from physical to mental, and now gone even deeper into actually what they call the causal body, now in that deep sleep state, we're still covered by ignorance. So we're not conscious. We're not aware. We wake up, we don't know what happened, then just a sense of things were good there, somehow peaceful and happy. But there's a fourth state that the Kathopanishad talks about called Turiya. And it's this fourth state, and corresponds to Samadhi. Now in Samadhi, the person goes back into his real state, like he does, say, in the dreamless sleep state, but now he's conscious. Now he's aware of it. Now it's a conscious experience, and so he is, it actually is transformed by that experience. Somebody asked Swami Varadananda Sri Ramakrishna's great disciple, but what's the difference between deep sleep and samadhi? He said that in both states, deep sleep and samadhi, he said the ego is not there. And so what's the difference? And then Swami Varadananda said that in deep sleep, a person goes into deep sleep a fool when he comes out a fool. But in samadhi, he goes into samadhi a fool, but he comes out a sage. In other words, once a person attains that samadhi, that conscious experience of his real self, now he knows, oh, this is it, this is the reality. I know what I am. I know what the universe is, I know what God is. And so that then the person becomes a realized soul. As long as he was an ego, as long as he was identified with this particular person, this body, this mind, and so forth, he was in ignorance. He thought, oh, I'm that person, and all I know is what I experience. But now he's gone deeper, and he's let go, completely kind of transcended, gone beyond all that kind of personal, individual, small identification, and now he realized this consciousness. And as Swami Varadananda said that once you realize that state, that your consciousness, your pure consciousness, you realize also that you're part of a much vaster consciousness. And he said, when you come back from that experience, you come back to the world, you realize, oh, everybody else is that same consciousness. That same one self is in everybody. And so you're completely transformed by that experience. So behind all these three states, waking state, and dream state, and dreamless sleep state, is the underlying reality. As long as we're in one of the states, we're limited. We're in ignorance. We're not aware of what the true reality of things is. When we, though, are able to transcend those three states and experience the reality, then we know, oh, this is what I am. I thought I was a body, now I realize, oh, I'm this wonderful being. So Swami then, Lokeshwarananda's commentary, he says that we all experience the three states. The waking state, the sleeping state, and the dreamless sleep state. In the waking state, both the mind and the body are active. The sense organs carry their impressions to the mind, and the mind collates them, as if the mind is their master. The mind may be their immediate master, but it is not the ultimate master. The ultimate master is the self, for the mind derives its authority from the self. When we sleep, the body is at rest, but the mind is active. We dream we are traveling, meeting people, and doing things we normally do in the waking state. This shows that the mind is independent of the body. But the mind is dependent on the self. When we have dreamless sleep, the mind is no longer active. This happens because the self has temporarily withdrawn the power it had delegated to the mind. The body and the mind are both now seemingly dead, as if the self has cast them away as useless adjuncts. So after a while, when we wake up, we take time to recognize our surroundings and what time of day it is. We feel, however, highly refreshed. This is because during deep sleep, the self went back to its real nature, even if only for a while. But ignorance drives us back to our waking state, and we again are caught up in the whirlpool of life's struggles. But there are discerning people who see the self as a substrate of all the experiences they have in different states. These experiences are possible because of the self, but they make no impression on the self. The self is a witness to the experiences. It's like a movie screen on which a series of events is projected without affecting the screen in the least. These discerning people also realize their oneness with this self. They remain as witnesses to what happens to them, and this is why they are able to overcome sorrow. So in other words, as a human being, when we identify with the body, then we identify with all our struggles and problems and all our limitations and failures and all these things. We identify with those, and then we have a very limited kind of up and down experience. But as soon as we know, this vast, infinite consciousness, all power is within me, all love, all wisdom, everything is there, and that's what I am, then nothing in the world can affect us. It's like you go to the movie, you watch the movie, and you may enjoy the movie, even though there may be terrible things, explosions and murders, particularly nowadays. Most of the movies, I think, they have all kinds of gory things and things. So, like that, all kinds of horrible things may be happening on the screen, but you're completely unaffected, and you find it even entertaining because I'm just sitting here in the theater. Everything's fine, But if you think all of this is happening to me, then it becomes a source of great turmoil, struggle, and suffering. So this is the idea, is that when we are identified with body, mind, and so forth, with our individuality, then we don't know who we are. And then we think everything that's going on is happening to me, and what do I do about it? But as soon as we know I'm infinite, immortal, eternal, spiritual being, nothing can harm me. Whatever happens, it doesn't matter. It was like a person identifies with his car. You buy a new car, and the first scratch you get, right away you think, and you get really upset because actually the car has nothing to do with you. It doesn't pick you up, but you've identified this is my car, and now I'm so disturbed that I got a scratch in it, and like that. Things happen, we identify with it and say, this happened to me, or this is happening to my possessions. And so then we get disturbed and unhappy. But when we realize, this is just things going on, and it has nothing to do with me, it can't harm me, it can't affect me in any way because I'm eternal spirit, then the person goes beyond all sorrow. Even though all kinds of problems may be there apparently in his life, he's not affected anymore. Just as a person who's watching a movie, he's not affected. Temporarily, you may get a little scared, in a horror movie or something, but in fact, it doesn't do you any harm. It doesn't hurt you. So then, verse 5 says that the person who knows the individual self, in spite of its enjoying the fruits of its actions, to be the Lord of the past, present, and future, and who finds himself close to him, in other words, realizes his unity with him, has no reason to be afraid of anything. This truly is that self which Nachiketa was asking about. So the idea here is that the individual self, the jiva, is none other than the cosmic self, Brahman. Apparently, the individual self is caught in the meshes of life. He works and enjoys the fruits of his work. And though the fruits are not always good, he still clings to the work. It is like honey to him. He loves to live that way. It is ignorance, but he is helpless. This, however, does not change his basic nature. He is Brahman, the cosmic self, and he remains Brahman. His attachment to the world is a temporary lapse, and he can correct himself any moment. Gold remains gold, though it may be covered with dirt. The goal of life is to realize that the individual self and the cosmic self are one and the same. That is, there is one self everywhere and in everything. This one has become many, many in terms of names and forms. When you realize this oneness of things, you are no longer afraid of anything. You have no reason to hide yourself, because for you, there is no duality. There is one self, and you are that self. The question of fear arises only when there is duality. So in our relationships with other people, we spend a lot of time worrying. Do people like me? And so forth. But actually, when you realize there's only one self, and that's what you are, then the duality, that even people who are very close to each other, there's still a duality, there's still barriers there. Even though you may be very close to a person, you don't actually know what that person's thinking, what their consciousness is, or anything. And but when you realize that you're the self, the consciousness in all beings, then that sense of duality, that sense of separation, that goes away. And instead, you live in conscious kind of harmony with all of existence. And what flows through you then is what's meant to flow through you. What manifests through you then is God's will. It's what's meant to express itself through you. And you don't have any concern, any worry. When the mind, when the body, mind, soul, when it's trying to figure out what should I do? How should I handle this situation? What should I say? How should I fix this relationship? When the mind is struggling with these problems, it's very difficult. And it gives us a lot of worry and concern and stress. But when you realize that the infinite, omniscient God is acting and you're not doing anything, you're just watching, you're just a witness, then all the stress goes out of existence. And everything then becomes a joy. Everything becomes happiness. There's one thing, when a person actually starts to get back, even in a small way, back into his inner self, his real self, he realizes, he experiences that life becomes much more simple, and it's much more peaceful, much more calm, and much more contented than he was before. The worry, the concern, the fear, anxiety, all these things, they gradually quiet down, and the person then begins to function normally and finding that everything, all actions, all words, and so on, they're just coming spontaneously, without effort, without struggle, without trying to figure, well, what should I say, what should I do? It just will flow naturally because it's starting to come from the one universal self, expressing itself, manifesting through this particular individual, and also at the same time expressing to all other individuals. So, but this is, like I said, for most people, we're so absorbed for such a long time, many, many lives, perhaps we're so absorbed with the idea of being human and being this particular individual that it's very difficult to kind of move towards this higher reality. So for most people, it starts out though simply, as it says, there's something there. There's a presence there. The important thing though is to realize that what you're seeking, however you think of God, whatever your idea of God is, it's important to remember that God is not something out there. He's not something you're going to find out in space or out on a cloud or in heaven somewhere. It's something that you'll find only within. And when you begin to search within and seek within, slowly then, it starts to become, just a little bit at a time, gradually, it starts to kind of infiltrate your daily existence, your daily consciousness. And slowly then, it begins to develop and build up and draw you more and more into it. So this is, in a nutshell, is just this is the basic teaching of Vedanta. And the basic teaching of all the mystics, of all the saints who have actually experienced God, they speak the same language, that there's one consciousness there. And it's possible for any individual to gradually become aware, to consciously begin to experience, connect with that one consciousness, and then it begins to unfold and eventually transforms the person completely. So that before he thought he was a human being, subject to disease and injury and all kinds of difficulties, he now realizes he's the child of God, immortal spirit, eternal, nothing can ever, and that this world is nothing more than a game. So any questions? Okay, so we got up to verse 5. Now we are, like I mentioned, this week we're having Sanskrit camp up again. There's about 100 people are attending. So that's going on now. On Sunday, Swami Varadananda is going to speak on meditation according to the yoga aphorisms. And then we have our regular classes. Oh, and then tomorrow we're going to have Ramnam. That'll be after we have the RT at 6. At 6:30 on Saturday we'll have Ramnam. And then Swami does his class Sunday at 11. And then we do just regular classes and things. Satoma Sagyamya Tamasoma Jyotirgamya Viturvam Amritam Gaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. O Lord, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light. Lead us from death to immortality. Peace, peace, peace.
आपने कभी नीलम से मिला? नीलम नीलम श्याम भाटी इज आल्सो पंजाबी.